Alright, hope everybody had a good week. I've got our summary that we made last time printed out here. It's going to go in bucket 2. So it's Genesis 15 and 16, those 2 chapters. Our title was, God makes a covenant with Abram, promising to multiply greatly both Isaac and Ishmael, but Hagar runs away and God brings her back. And our storyline summary was, God makes a covenant with Abram, the covenant ceremony with the halved animals. We had a unilateral covenant, only God walks between the animals. God promises Abram a son. God tells Abram his descendants will be slaves, but there's a prophecy of conquest after the slavery. Ishmael's born, Hagar runs away, God prophesies Ishmael's fate, and God brings Hagar back. So, bucket number 2. So now, our summary for what we did last week, Genesis 17 to 19. So the title, I think Julie got us started this week, so I rearranged it into just a single sentence. So it says, God reaffirms Abrahamic covenant through changing Abraham and Sarah's name before Abraham argues with God over destroying the righteous with the wicked in Sodom. After which Lot escapes to a cave with his daughters who bear his children as the fathers of the Moabite and Ammonite peoples. So I thought that was a pretty good title. So let's go through our summary here, our chronology here. So what happens first in Genesis 17 to 19?
Abram is changed his name to change to Abraham.
Abram changed to Abraham.
Confirms his covenant with Abraham.
God confirms covenant with Abraham. Okay? What next? We had a lot happen in the narrative last time.
Sarah's name changed.
Sarah's name too, that's right.
They get the news that they'll have a son.
Yep, that's in the covenant.
Oh.
I'm going to put that here. Have a son. I'll add that in. Yep. Very good.
The towns of Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed.
That's right. That comes at the end. Destroyed. In the middle there we get a very important ritual that, yeah, there you go, very good. Circumcision. And then what?
A very disturbing thing that happens.
Which is?
Lot's daughters.
Yeah.
I don't really want to say it.
I'll just say Lot and his daughter. How about that? In the cave.
Yeah, that's better.
What?
Relation.
Oh, okay, thank you. Very politically correct.
Abraham pleads for Sodom.
Oh yeah, very good. That's going to be important. Abraham argues for Sodom. Anything else?
Still speaking, yeah.
All right. Save that one. Bring these up in a second. So, did anybody try this week to recap Genesis 1 through 11 to anybody else in their life? Yes? That's good. Doing that is going to help you. I came up with another idea this week. One of the ways that I remember what goes on in the Bible and the text is a concept of sequence. I have to build up a sequence because since this is history, one thing tends to lead to another. So I'm not a great piano player because if I get off somewhere, like as long as I can stay in the flow and I know the next notes, then I'm good. But then I get off somewhere, I can't like pick it up in the middle. You sort of memorize the flow. Memorizing the flow of this text is one of the ways that if you can jump into the story at a point, you kind of remember what comes next. So if you keep asking yourself, and what next, and what next, and what next, it'll help you remember this. So sometime when you got your phone out, you're bored, and you were going to scroll Facebook or X or watch a YouTube video, just pop open your Notes app and see if you can recap one or two word, phrases that sort of walk you through the sequence of Genesis 1 through 11, or what we've done so far in 12 through 19. So I did this the other day just to give you an idea of what this would look like. So if we were going to do the 1 through 11, bucket number 1, it might look something like creation. There's no right answer. You don't have to memorize what I'm writing down, but the idea would be keep generating it out of your own head instead of just hearing someone say it, and write it down yourself. We had creation, then we had the fall, then we had murder, then we had evil, that led to the flood, that led to Babel, then that led to Abraham. So if somebody asks you something from the Bible, you remember, hey, that has something to do with the flood, you can kind of tell that story before and afterward. Bucket number 2, here's what I came up with for this one. So far, this one's going to have a lot more stuff. We had Abraham. We started with that. Then we had a covenant. Then he left Ur. We had famine. He went to Egypt. We had the sister trick. Then he got rich. He goes back to Canaan. Him and Lot split up. You see how this works? Just shrinking it into these short words can help you work through that sequence. An important guy that only appears there, so we better include him all the time, is Melchizedek, since he prefigures Christ. Then we get Hagar and Ishmael. Now we're into what last week was. That's supposed to be an ampersand. And we just did circumcision. You're allowed to write it down and cheat when you're up in front of everybody, but when you're by yourself. Abraham argues with God. That's an important thing to understand about our relationship with God. And then we had Sodom and Gomorrah. So try doing that to practice a little bit. You'll be amazed at how 3-4 times that really speeds you up. In fact, when I teach computer programming at Purdue, what I tell everyone is find a tutorial that implements a program and just have it open beside you and just write it. Just write it out. You won't know what 80% of the stuff is, but then put it away and see if you can write it again, still not knowing what the 80% of the stuff is. But every time you hit something you don't know, just refer back. Just jump back over and fill that in. And by the time you've done that the 3rd or 4th time, you know how to write that program. You've naturally just picked up things without working at it at all, because you had the answer right in front of you, but you repeated it, right? The repetition. So if you're not comfortable coming up with it on your own, start with this one and try to write that yourself. And if it doesn't work, just don't beat your head against the wall. Just bump over, find the right answer, and do it again. So, anyway, I find that very helpful. So, what we're going to get into this week, I'm going to call this Midrash. And so in Judaism, they have the Torah, sort of the most holy part of Judaism, and then they have the Tanakh, the rest of the Old Testament. They have the rabbis' writings about that, which is a whole lot bigger, called the Talmud. And they also have something called the Midrash. And so the Midrash is taking a biblical story that just doesn't seem like it has enough details for us to understand the full picture and filling in the blanks. So all the commentaries I read this week, they were largely Midrash. They were, here's what the text says, and now imagine how Abraham felt. And now imagine how this went, and imagine how that went. Most of them, though, unfortunately, always ran down Abraham. I'm not going to try to run down Abraham. If you catch me doing that, yell out. Don't run down Abraham. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he did know what he was doing in this story. Because the Bible doesn't actually say. So we're going to start out Genesis chapter 20, verse 1. And we're in this region over here. So, first part here says that he settles between... Oh, come on, zoom in.
There we go.
So he went south. We got Kadesh Barnea and Shur. You remember this is where Hagar went on her way, headed back to Egypt. And so we're in that region there. This right here is the Negev desert. So he kind of comes down through here, and then he's going to end up going back up toward Beersheba. So from there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. And he sojourned in Gerar. So Gerar was back up here. This was Philistine territory. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, I did look it up. It's pronounced Abimelech, not Abimelech. So when you think, oh, Aaron's saying it wrong, you're saying it wrong. No. It's because Melech is king, and Abi is from Abba, or father. And so it's like, it either means my father is the king, or father of a king, or something like that. And so it's more of a title than a name. Abimelech. Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man, because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife." You imagine God telling you that in a dream? You're a dead man.
Nice.
Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, "Oh, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Like everybody, I am all of my people. Will you kill us all? Did he not himself say to me, 'She's my sister'? And she herself said, 'He's my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this.'" Of course, the innocence of his hands didn't seem to ask Sarah if she wanted to go into his harem or anything like that. But God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things, and the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You've done to me things that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, or Abimelech, sorry. Just seeing if you're paying attention. Abimelech said to Abraham, "Why? What did you see that you did this thing?" And Abraham said, "I did it because I thought, there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, 'This is the kindness you must do me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants and gave them to Abraham, and returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, 'Behold, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you.' To Sarah he said, 'Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and female slaves, so that they bore children. For God had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abram's wife." So there was more than just a dream. There was some physical manifestation here that was stopping them from being able to have children. Abraham defeated 4 kings with his own personal army. And he shows up here, and he doesn't fight at all. It just doesn't make sense. That part does not make sense to me. Why doesn't he fight instead of lying or telling a half-truth? And Sarah's 89 years old. Why does Abimelech take Sarah? She's 89 years old. She's past the age of having children, right? We've heard that in the story already. She's about to have Isaac, though. There's a very important point, though, that God had closed the wombs and basically made everyone so they couldn't have kids. If they could, there might have always been a question mark hanging over who was the actual father of Isaac, right? Because you would have just had to take Abimelech's word for it, that nothing happened. And so because that all got shut down, Now we know Abraham was the one. It's interesting that God said the sin here was against him and not against Abraham. I thought that. He didn't say you had sinned against Abraham, whose wife you took, because Abraham didn't tell him. But what was Abraham's thing that he said he saw? Why did he didn't just say I was afraid. He said, there's no fear of God in this place. I mean, the Philistines had their own gods. You would assume they had a fear of Dagon, but they didn't have a fear of God. And I think it's strange that, or I thought it was strange until I thought about it, that Abraham didn't tell Abimelech anything about God. He just said there's no fear of Elohim in this place. And Abimelech understands what he's talking about. He doesn't respond. He doesn't say, who's Elohim? I'm afraid of my own God, right? He doesn't call that Abraham's God. But remember, he just saw this God in a dream. I think Abimelech sort of learned from that dream that this was the creator of the universe. And he does not argue with Abraham that there was fear of God in that place. And that's why I think we ought to give Abraham the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Abraham was right. They were going to kill him for his 89-year-old wife if he didn't do this, right? He had to go through this in order for that to happen.
I mean, well, it's probably because of the internet and they didn't really have anyone to compare her to.
Oh, I think Abimelech had plenty of women to compare her to, since this was the standard way that they did things then.
Well, okay.
But you do have a further proof here that this is an old text written before the Jews sort of became a people and had the law, because Leviticus 18 tells us that you're prohibited from marrying a half-sister. So now not only did the patriarch of the Jewish people feed God himself milk and meat together at dinner, but he also married his half-sister, both of which are completely outlawed in the subsequent laws of Israel. All right, so we're going to jump into chapter 21. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised, and Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age? You can almost hear the happiness in Sarah's voice. 25 years. But in my notes here, I had only one word to comment on this section, and that was the word, finally. Isaac's here. So, next, verse 8. And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, I'm going to turn my page. Do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, oh, let me not look on the death of the child. And she sat opposite him. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So this is the wilderness of Paran right here. So this is where Ishmael grew up. So we're going to see this throughout Genesis, the danger of having favorites among your children. Right? Isaac was the little prince everybody had been waiting for 25 years, and poor Ishmael. I mean, from the text, it sounds like he's just acting like a normal big brother. May have been more than that, but it doesn't say any more than that. But there's just no end of problems when you treat one of your children as if you like them better than the other one. Even if you do, you can't let on. Abraham loved Ishmael. That is obvious. I mean, when God told him Isaac was going to be born, it's the first thing he said, what about Ishmael? What about Ishmael? I mean, Abraham, who had only wanted a son all that time, had this kid who was 14 years old at this time. Well, when he gets kicked out, he's 17. He taught him everything he knew. They probably had, hunting trips, fishing trips, all those kinds of things together. Abraham had formed a bond with Ishmael. And when Sarah says you have to cast him out, I think it broke his heart. You wonder why he became a wild donkey of a man. I mean, his dad excommunicated him at 17, right? He cut off all contact with him. He didn't just say, you can't have the inheritance, you can't be the firstborn. He kicked him out. And Abraham was a rich man. He kicked him out. He could have sent him with at least a servant, a donkey, 2 skins of water, couple pieces of bread, 1 loaf of bread, and a skin of water, to the point that it ran out soon enough, and they were on the verge of dying of thirst. You imagine that moment Abraham has to tell this to Hagar and Ishmael. We all think of Abraham as not having to sacrifice his son because God called out from heaven and told him to stop. But Abraham had to sacrifice Ishmael. Ishmael left. He never saw him again. From his perspective, he was dead. And he had to die in such a way that there could never again in history be a claim from the Arab peoples on the inheritance of Abraham. And that's why he had to send him out with nothing. If he had given him anything, he would have still been considered legally some kind of son that was due an inheritance. You ever seen like a family when the parents die and then the kids are all haggling over what we're going to get, and it's not what the parents said? The kids all make up stuff about how they're supposed to get more than what we thought the parents said. Yeah. So it's interesting here though that Sarah seems, yeah?
I was just saying, it does look like, there could have still been some contact with him, because I think later on, it does mention how Ishmael came back for the burial and that.
That's true.
Like in 25.
That is true. I'm sure that was a very
There could have
tense
been some,
funeral.
I don't know, some kind of community.
Well, and he did stay here in Beersheba, right? He stayed at the southern end of Israel, which is near Ishmael. So it just doesn't say that they ever hung out again.
Yeah.
It was probably a very tense funeral
I wouldn't know.
later on. Sarah here, she had the right idea for the wrong reason. Sarah was jealous. That's what the text seems to indicate here, right? You've got to kick him out. He's doing that to my son. But God affirms the right idea, even though it was done for the wrong reason, that you have to kick Ishmael out. And all Abraham has is God's promise that Ishmael is not going to die, right? That's all he had. And he trusted God and sent him out with nothing but the bread and the water. Now, Paul tells us that there are 2 covenants actually represented by these 2 kids. So we're going to turn over to Galatians chapter, I didn't write the chapter, verse 21. Let me find it. It's right before Ephesians. All right, yeah, chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 21. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay. Is the law then contrary to the promises of God? Certainly not, for if a law had been given that could give life, then righteousness would indeed be by the law. But the Scripture imprisoned everything under sin, so that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. Now before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then, the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. For in Christ Jesus, you are all sons of God through faith. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. So the offspring according to the promise was Isaac, right? The offspring according to the flesh was Ishmael. And so you get to be in one camp or the other. The law was actually represented in this by Ishmael, by Hagar's son, by the son of the Egyptian woman. And the law could never save us, but only condemn us. And so it was originally, the original promise was actually threefold: people, property, and that there would be a blessing to all the nations that would come later on. And the blessing to all the nations that would come later on through Abraham was Jesus, that enabled us all to become children through Isaac by adoption. All right, so turning back to Genesis. Verse 22 of chapter 21. At that time, Abimelech, and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what's the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, or the well of the 7, because they're both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. There's a lot of 7s in this chapter. You may not have seen them all. I just think it's interesting. First, there's 7 ewes. We see that one. Abimelech's name is there 7 times. Abraham's name is there 7 times if you end the story at 33, the end of 33. You don't count 34. Beersheba means well number 7, or the well of 7. And the word covenant, or oath, is actually derived from the word 7. So 7 indicates a covenant or a contract or something. There's a lot of 7s in that short period of time. So we can remember from here on out, like 7 is a sign of trust, or it's a sign of covenant. This is actually the first property that Abraham owned here, Beersheba. He now gets it because he bought it. And I think it's interesting to just see the changed status that Abraham has with Abimelech now, right? That now Abimelech wants him around. He's like, please stay around so we'll be blessed. All right, so Genesis 22. Oh, Beersheba. Beersheba is right here, right at the top of the Negev desert. The reason you'll hear Beersheba a lot is it became a catchphrase or a way of describing all of Israel. Later they would say from Dan, which was one of the northernmost cities, all the way to Beersheba. So they would describe all of Israel as Dan to Beersheba. All right, so 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. He tells them that Isaac's coming back. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and he laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. And they went, both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. Why did God rub it in by saying, your only son, the one you love? Why couldn't he just say, take Isaac? Because this was a test, right? Like, he had to make sure there was nothing left on the table at the end of this test. This is the same kind of command it's the same words actually God used when he told Abraham to leave Ur and go to the place he would show him. He tells him to leave Beersheba and go to the place he's going to show him on Mount Moriah. Given that it was not that long ago that we just saw Abraham arguing with God for the city of Sodom, a city so evil that he destroyed it with fire from the sky, he doesn't say a word arguing for his son Isaac. It's such a contrast.
Yeah, he pretty much figured there's no arguing with God at this point.
So that's where the Midrash comes in. Why? I don't know. I thought through, there's some differences here. One difference is, in the case of Sodom, he wasn't commanding Abraham to do something. He was just telling Abraham what he was going to do. So maybe it was just more acceptable to argue with him in that case. Another thing was, when God told you to sacrifice your child in the ancient world, you did it. You didn't argue with God. That was something gods had the right to do. That was common. We don't understand that. But when the other gods, we grew up thinking, or I grew up thinking, the other gods weren't real, right? But we saw when we were back earlier in Genesis that they were these fallen angels, right? Paul tells us they're demons. So they did tell people to sacrifice their kids. And people did that. They didn't have an option. Another reason might be Abraham actually had a conflict of interest in Isaac. He was arguing sort of an abstract principle of justice for the people of Sodom. But with Isaac, there was no unbiased party to come argue with him. He didn't have standing to argue legally for it. And, Abraham did have a direct promise from God that he trusted, right? He's like, I don't know how this, he could be thinking, I don't know how this is going to work out, but God promised me specifically. I know because he told me like 4 times that it's going to be through Isaac, your child, that came from Sarah. And it may very well be, after he argued with God about Sodom, that Abraham was just convinced God was just. There was no reason to argue with him any further. Hebrews 11 tells us, actually, that Abraham expected that God would raise Isaac from the dead after he sacrificed him. That's what Hebrews 11 tells us. But as interesting as it is that God did not argue, why did Isaac not argue? Isaac doesn't say anything. He just asks the question, what's going on? And it doesn't say a thing back. And Isaac is old enough, we don't really know his age. He's somewhere between his early teens, and because he has to be old enough to carry that wood. It takes a lot of wood to burn up a body, okay? So he had to be old enough to carry the wood and strong enough. But his mother dies later when he's 37 years old. So he could be 35, he could be 17, we don't really know. But obviously Abraham was asking him to carry the wood because Abraham was 100, or at least 110. So Abraham was old and infirm, and somehow he bound Isaac to lay him on the altar. And so we know from that Isaac didn't struggle. Also for us, I think from Isaac's perspective too, we just don't get it because our culture looks at child sacrifice as wrong, but the only reason we look at it as wrong is because of this story. Isaac did not have that. Isaac was simply there as having been marked by God for death. God had said, it's your turn to die, and I think there's a very good chance he didn't blame his dad for that. It wasn't his dad's fault. God had said, you're going to be sacrificed, and Isaac accepted his fate. Because that hindsight helps us. If this happened to you today, you would say, but I know the God that I believe in doesn't want child sacrifice. He doesn't accept child sacrifice, because he taught us that in this story. So if a spirit comes to you and tells you this today, there are people who have killed children out of this exact scenario. They thought a spirit had come and told them to sacrifice their kid and God would stop them before it happened. If this happens, you say no. Because that's not God. Because Paul tells us that demons masquerade as angels of light, and the way you know if this is from God or not is by testing what they tell you against the scriptures.
That and,
And there's a new covenant.
that and also schizophrenia exists.
Yes, but so anyways, don't do it. You have this scripture that they didn't have at that time, right? This changed history. There's now no child sacrifice to God because of this story, and he did it in such a unique way. He didn't just command it, no sacrifice. He told you a story that made sure this was not going to happen again.
Well, there's no sacrifice in total because of the new covenant. I mean,
Yes, that's part of what you can say back to the spirit that says sacrifice your child. Is you say Jesus was the final sacrifice. It's a very, very good point, Adam. Like, the sacrifice has already been paid. There's no more needed, right? So, anyways. Have you ever had to do something, especially lead people doing something that you did not want to do? Imagine Abraham. I mean, he gets told this. He wakes up in the morning, and now he has to put a plan together. It tells us he goes out. I mean, it's very intimate. He goes and does these things himself. He doesn't have his servants do it. He goes out, and he chops the wood. You ever chopped a tree down with an axe? It takes a long time. It takes a lot of trees to burn up a sacrifice. That morning, Abraham's out there. Everybody's asking him, what are you doing? He can't tell them. Doesn't tell them. Chopping those trees down. Sweating. Stacking the wood. He knows what's like. This is the biggest dread you can imagine. He has to plan what he's going to do. Like, he's got to take everything with him. You know, he's got to get the donkeys organized. He's got to get the servants in place. Do I tell Sarah? Do I not tell Sarah while I'm gone? Who's in charge? Don't forget the knife. Right? Make sure you bring that. You don't want to get up there, realize you forgot it, have to come back down. It's a 3-day journey. Isaac being excited about a trip with Dad. Right? Dad, what are we doing?
awkward trip back.
He had to do all of that. Everybody asking, when are you going to be back? You know, this is a tough day. Tough day for Abraham. Really tough 3 days. So, the direct purpose of this test, what God tells us at the end here, is that he was testing, well actually, let's go ahead, let's read, we read 9 yet? No, let's go ahead and read 9. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham! And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide, or Yahweh Yireh, or as we often say it, Jehovah Jireh. He called it Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Abraham had given Isaac a very unusual answer to his question. His question was, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham didn't want to tell him directly, it seems like. But he didn't say, I don't know. He said, God will provide for himself a sacrifice. I mean, if that is not a direct foreshadowing of Christ, I don't know what. Because you think of all the other ways he could have answered that. That's not your first choice, as what would come to mind in that situation. So, if you look at this, how many parallels are there to Christ in this story? There's a concept in the Old Testament of a type of Christ. A type of Christ means a figure who has a lot of things in common with Christ who eventually comes. There's a lot of them throughout the story of the Old Testament, and Isaac is one of them. So let's think about things that Jesus and Isaac had in common. First, they're both born miraculously, right? God took long enough with Sarah and Abraham. There's no way you could explain it other than a pure miracle. A pure miracle that was predicted by God from heaven. Second, both of them were sons of the promise that were loved by their father. They were not sons of the flesh, they were sons of the promise. Because Jesus was the promise of that blessing that would come later, and Isaac was the promise of the people that would flow from Abraham. They were both the only begotten son. The other sons had been cast out and kicked out. We read that about the sons of God at the Tower of Babel. And Abraham had kicked out his other son Ishmael. Both of them carried the wood to the place of their sacrifice. Ishmael and Jesus. Jesus in the form of a cross. Both of them went willingly. Jesus went willingly, and so did Isaac. Both of them, like a lamb before the slaughter, did not open their mouth. Both of them were sacrificed on Mount Moriah. So Mount Moriah becomes a very important place through the rest of this text. Here's Moriah. This mountain, this is the city of Jerusalem. And it doesn't tell us directly, but the general consensus is that the place that Abraham sacrificed Isaac, where he built that altar all those thousands of years ago, eventually became the threshing floor of Ornan that was bought by David, which is eventually where they put the temple. So both of them were sacrificed at basically the same spot. Hebrews 11 told us that Abraham, the father, trusted that God could raise the dead. So both of the fathers in this case knew that the dead could and would be raised in this situation. The ram in the thicket took Isaac's place, just as Jesus took our place. There was a concept of substitutionary atonement in this for both situations. And in the end, a sacrifice was still needed. It was sort of left open. He said that God would provide for himself a lamb, but what they sacrificed was a ram. And we don't see the lamb until John the Baptist points at Jesus, walking towards him and says, "Here comes the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." But I do think there's one important contrast here between the story of Jesus and the story of Isaac. And that's how it ends. Well, Jesus didn't truly end, but it ends at the sacrifice. Abraham didn't have to sacrifice his son. God came and stopped him. But when Jesus was hanging on the cross, nobody came and stopped him. The camera did not cut away. He went through with the whole thing. So if you remember what we talked about early on in this class, God is clearly the most tragic figure in the entire Bible. Because God had to go through the whole thing. So, the direct purpose of this test. I think Dennis Prager put it the best, the one commentator I read, or one of the commentators I read. The direct purpose of this test was to show Abraham and us that good people have to be willing to do, or to have to be as committed to goodness as evil people are committed to evil. The sacrifice of children to the gods was evil. God rails against it through the rest of this Old Testament. But if Abraham was not willing to do that for the one true God, then there's something lacking. There's something missing, because the evil people were willing to do that for their gods. So that was the direct purpose. But the indirect purpose was this revolution, which is the reason, like I said before, this story is the reason why you don't think child sacrifice is normal or okay today. It's purely because this story came onto the human scene in this Torah. It taught the world God does not want child sacrifice. And think about how it changed the relationship between fathers and sons for the rest of history. Without this story, there would always be a tension between every father and every son. That someday things are going to get bad enough, or you're going to get ambitious enough that you're going to feel like you need to sacrifice me for something. And this took that away. And there was only one people, one culture, one religion that considered the child sacrifice bad. And that's this one, and that's what tells me that God injected this from outside humanity. It did not come from humanity. They did not reason their way to no bad child sacrifice. All right, so let's finish up here. The angel of the Lord. That guy is here all the time. Isn't it strange how sometimes he talks about God as another person and sometimes he says it's me? Like it's all through this story as we already went through before. So the angel of the Lord's back. He calls to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now after these things it was told to Abraham, "Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor." This is back in Ur. Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel is the dad of Rebekah, who's going to marry Isaac. So that's why that's kind of important, is it came from his actual wife and not his concubine. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Rumah, bore Teba, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. James tells us in chapter 2 that this story here is proof. Well, if you read it a certain way, it sounds like he's telling us that Abraham was justified by works here. Because God is telling him, because you did this, I will surely multiply you. What James is talking about, though, is this weird scenario. He's trying to help people understand that you don't have faith without works. Right? What James is talking about is sort of, people were asking the question sort of like, what if God had chosen Abraham to do this and Abraham had refused? What then? Would God have carried through on his unilateral promise if Abraham didn't show this faith? Would God have done it? And the answer is, we don't have to ask that question because God did not create a universe where that happened. I don't know if God knew everything that was going to happen, so he picked an Abraham that was going to react this way, right? Like God is in control, God knew everything. And this Abraham demonstrated his faith by his willingness to sacrifice Isaac. Because he didn't actually sacrifice Isaac, right? He didn't do the work that we're supposedly justified by. God stopped him from it. Now it did tell us in Hebrews 6, that just calling back out here because we revisited this earlier, that God did swear by himself. And Hebrews tells us why God swore by himself. Because there was no one greater to swear by. Usually you swear by someone greater than you. So that's it for this week. We are going to do Genesis 23, 24, 25 next week. So Sarah dies, Abraham dies, Isaac gets a wife, and Jacob and Esau are going to be born.